This semester in Ignatian Themes in Film, we took several films and connected them to the weeks of Ignatius' spiritual exercises. My name is Connor, and today myself and my group members, Jackson and Jack, will be doing the same thing with the film Good Will Hunting. To briefly summarize, this movie is about a 22-year-old from Boston named Will Hunting. Will is a self-taught math genius. However, he is merely a janitor at MIT in the beginning of the movie due to a term of his most recent parole agreement. Though Will could certainly be achieving much higher than this, it is understood by viewers that he denies himself the opportunity to grow as an individual and take risks because of his past trauma during his childhood, as he is scared to suffer again. This all changes, however, when Professor Lambeau at MIT catches him completing a complex math problem at night. From this point on, Will's parole agreement is changed and he is to help out in the MIT math department as long as he sees his new therapist named Sean. Throughout the movie, Sean is able to begin breaking down Will's layer of security, but not quickly enough, as Will lets the love of his life, Skylar, get away from him during this time because he remains too scared to suffer again. However, at the end of the film, Will ends up crying in Sean's arms and opening up about his childhood trauma, which helps him embrace his suffering and move on with his life. This leads him to chasing Skylar to California at the end of the movie and moving on to bigger things, which he is now able to do since he no longer fears suffering.
Obviously, this is a deep plotline, so it may surprise you that this is not an originally written for the sophisticated or deep purpose at all. In fact, according to Natasha Rita, the original screenplay of this film was produced by Ben Affleck and Matt Damon to be a, quote, acting reel, to show off their acting skills. However, this director, Gus Van Sant, brought the deep intention to this original screenplay. The director typically produced very niche films that generally targeted the more outsider audience. However, he took this film because, according to Clint Worthington, it gave him a chance to swing for a broader audience. In this way, the director's vision for this film was to use the athletic, funny guy as the victim of deep suffering in order to spread this message regarding suffering to a broader audience in a much more digestible way, as opposed to this typical style that would be more fitting for a niche group. In order to communicate to this broader audience, Van Sant makes great use of his mise-en-scène element of framing. In the movie, the director Van Sant makes very particular choices as to how each scene is displayed. For most of the movie, for example, Sean and Will are never in focus on the same screen together. This is until Will has his breakdown in which he finally shares his trauma with Sean, in which scene they both come into focus together. In our opinion, this represents the fact that the most of the movie, Will does not trust Sean and suffers alone. However, once he stops denying himself the opportunity to deal with his suffering and move into new life, he is finally able to let Sean and live more fully. In this way, and many other applications of the mise-en-scène, Van Sant is able to create an overwhelming amount of symbolism in the movie such as a broader audience can take a genuine message from it.
We decided to connect this film to week 4 of Ignatius' spiritual exercises, which is the week of resurrection. At first, we thought this movie was more so categorized by week 3 on suffering, as it deals with Will's journey to become more open about his own suffering. However, we ultimately ended up choosing week 4 instead of week 3, because the concluding week of the exercises takes this suffering experienced in week 3 and adds a new ending to it, saying that it can be transformed into new life. As seen in the article titled Opening the Door in the week 4 Canvas module of this course, there are 2 paths to meaningful transformation, great love and great suffering. This article repeatedly refers to these 2 things as the primary spiritual teachers for us. Just as love forces us to give up control in order to achieve something great, so too does suffering, though oftentimes it is unwelcomed at first, as it forces us to surrender control. This can have 2 outcomes. Either we can transmit our pain to others or transform it into something positive, both of which can be seen in Good Will Hunting. For example, in this movie, when Skylar attempts to dive deeper into a relationship with Will and understand his childhood wounds better, Will is so deeply suffering at this point that he pushes her away, screaming, "You don't want to know that, Skylar," and appearing violent. In this way, he transmits his pain to her effectively, which demonstrates the fine line between transition and translation when it comes to suffering. Alternatively, later in the movie, Will finally begins to open up. When Sean says that he too was abused as a child, Will begins to cry, and he at last comes to terms with his own suffering and embraces Sean. In this way, suffering can also be seen to have a positive transformative benefit in this movie. It is in this transformation that the heart of week 4 lies, as according to Margaret Silf in her article titled One Step at a Time, even though temptation is just a small step away from action, so too is the step between death and resurrection, and in this way we are invited through week 4 to join Jesus in his resurrection. This can be seen in Good Will Hunting by the aftermath of Will's crying confession to Sean. After this, he finally feels bold enough to leave town and push himself to become something better, leaving for California to chase both Skylar and a better life. In this way, coming to terms with suffering allowed Will to transform his life into something far more meaningful, which is the very essence of Jesus' resurrection and week 4. Additionally, now that we've established what week 4 is and how it connects to the movie we chose, I want to get a little bit into how we came to choose Good Will Hunting. Mostly it's because of the impact it has had on all of us. For me, this movie has impacted me by teaching me that it's okay to be open about suffering. And it also kind of goes with week 4 in the fact that just as Will can transform his suffering to new life, it's kind of shown me that I can do the same and has encouraged me to be more open. Finally, as one might guess, God's grace is absolutely necessary to ensure that we can transform this pain into new life rather than transmit it to others. As such, we're going to go through a couple of our favorite prayer experiences this year. For me, the 2 readings of the Passion stories, as well as the imaginative prayer that followed it, was the most impactful. Usually I don't interact with prayer much, but this prayer forced me to internalize the 2 stories and kind of paint them in my own head and interact with them such that I was able to gain a better understanding of suffering and was able to picture Jesus' suffering, and B, reflect on it such that I could even sort of apply it to my own life. And in this way I took a lot out of this prayer, which I usually wouldn't get out of a typical prayer.
So my favorite prayer was week 3 prayer because that connected with suffering. And it really showed me a different way to view my suffering, and it really changed my outlook on life and just everything in general, so I really appreciated that.
My favorite prayer was week 1, God's unconditional, ever faithful love, just because I feel like it connects with me a lot because of the love I have for my family.